Here is a knowledge graph that I use as a reasoning expert in my AI, in Claude in this case. I'm going to show you how I build it using InfraNodus so that I create a reasoning ontology, which I can then apply to any other project or thinking process in my favorite LLM tool or even inside InfraNodus itself. So first of all, in order to build the graph, what I do is I use the automatic InfraNodus ontology generation. I'll show you how it works later, but first I'll just give you a quick overview. As you can see here, it generates key statements on a certain topic. In this case, it's ecological thinking, so that I have a visual representation of this domain. As a graph, I can see the most important topics, they're bigger on the graph. I can see which clusters they form. These have distinct colors. So for example, when I think about ecological thinking, I see that it's about ecological ethics, biodiversity challenges, trophic interactions, and so on, right? So that gives me a representation of the discourse. However, the advantage of the graph is that it also highlights the underrepresented clusters. So each time I'm going to try to develop this discourse, InfraNodus is going to focus on those underrepresented clusters in order to get the optimal balance of coherency and diversity of ideas. So it's really great because you don't only build an overview, but you also build something that helps you develop it further. Then when you go to the gaps view here, it actually identifies interesting gaps in this structure that helps you bridge those different ideas in new ways and develop this discourse further. So once you use this additional insights to build a coherent and interconnected structure for a certain domain that has an optimal topical structure, then you can go inside your favorite LLM tool, like Claude in this case, and after connecting the InfraNodus MCP server, you can query this graph directly as a reasoning expert in order to get some additional insights into any other field. For example, here I asked how I can use this reasoning ontology about ecological thinking to actually change my daily rhythm. And then because it already knows about my daily rhythm, what I'm working on, it applies now this thinking framework, which I defined very precisely here, right? So I have full control. It's like a reasoning map for my AI. Now I apply it here and I can use it in some other realm of my life or work. So I find this workflow very helpful. And in fact, if you want to reuse this graph, you simply go here, and then you can connect this graph to the MCP server, and here it tells you which tools you can use inside the InfraNodus MCP server to query this graph or to retrieve interesting insights and to even develop it further. So by the way, you could also build the same graph directly from Claude through the InfraNodus MCP server, and then you have this visual feedback that helps you see whether you added all the different topics and ideas that you wanted, or if you should build it a little bit further. So now that I showed you how it works, let me show you how you can build one like this yourself. So for that, you need to go to InfraNodus apps section here, and then here you have the field where you can start with the prompt, and you basically have different ways of building it. For instance, if I decide to build a graph on ecological thinking, I can simply type in the ecological thinking here and then go to AI prompt, and here I have several options. I can create a ready-made ontology and a knowledge graph, or I can also develop ideas step by step. I will first show you how it builds a full graph directly. So here I'm going to use the knowledge graph, right, for ecological thinking, and maybe let me just give it another name. I click visualize, and what happens here is that InfraNodus generates statements using Claude, the model that I selected here, on this topic of ecological thinking. So it kind of tells the model, tell me everything you know about ecological thinking, but be as diverse in your thinking as possible. So that's why it's going to build a very dispersed graph at first, because it focuses on the breadth of your knowledge, right? Like first it tries to develop your ideas as wide as possible and to cover the biggest territory possible. It's going to take a moment, but in the end you will have something like this. You will be on the topical view, so you see the main topical clusters of ideas. If you want to go into more detailed view, you can click on the concepts here, and then you will have a very detailed graph of the main concepts and the relations between them. And here in AI Insights, you have a summary of what this graph is about. So for example, here you can read that ecological thinking frames ecosystems as holistic, complex systems thinking, biotic, abiotic interactions, energy flow, succession, climate disturbance, and so on, right? So there we get like a visual overview. We see the main concepts that it generated, and we see the main topics. Okay, and so then depending on how far you want to go, you can develop this graph further. My favorite thing with the graphs is that they actually allow me to see where I'm lacking connections, right? So I see the overview here that it's about ecological holism, ecosystem dynamics, and so on. But as you can see, the clusters are not well connected. And InfraNodus is actually telling me this directly by highlighting those clusters with the halo here. You see, they're the ones that could benefit from better connections, because then it would make the graph more coherent. You can also see it in the discourse structure here. It's dispersed, and here it explains you why. If you click here, it explains the whole science behind. But basically, what InfraNodus is trying to do when the discourse is dispersed like that is to connect your ideas better, to have the graph have a bit more coherent structure, so it's in the optimal realm rather than dispersed. And it shows me what are the topics I should focus on. So for example, you see these two smaller topics here, abiotic influence and disturbance effects, and then it tries to connect them to the main one of ecological holism. So I can click here, and then I can generate an interesting question. That's the workflow I like to use, because I like to think with the LLM here. So then it will first generate an interesting question that will link these clusters together, and then I can send this question back to AI, and then it's going to generate an interesting statement for me, which I can then choose to add into this graph. Okay, so this is how it works first. Like, it just basically generates some interesting ideas, then I can select something I like and then add it into the graph, and as you see, it's going to start building my graph further and further. So the point where I can stop is when the connections they reach a level of having an optimal coherence, which I will see here. Discourse structure, it will say that it's diversified, and then it will say that it's an optimal structure. And I do that by focusing on these smaller clusters here, generating interesting questions that link them together, then elaborating on the statements, and then I can either add these statements myself here. If I click add content, I can add more, or I will show you now how it works when it's done automatically through AI. When it generates something I like, if it generates an interesting statement, I can select that statement, add it here, and you see InfraNodus will automatically add this statement here. It will automatically tag all the main ideas that already exist in the graph using the Wikilink syntax. So then it means it's also very much compatible with your Obsidian bolts, and you can also reuse this graph, export them here, actually here, and then you can use them in your Obsidian. And so you're gradually building a graph like this by connecting those less represented clusters. And also another way to do that is to go onto the gaps tab here and then try to see which are the topics that are not so well connected. So for example, you see here we have soil water, which is quite a specific topic, and ecological holism, which is quite general. So now let's build a connection between them. We click on this gap, InfraNodus generates a research question, we send it back to the AI, or we think of the answer ourselves, and then once we come up with something we like, we can either write it here in the input field, or we can also select the part of the answer that we like from the InfraNodus AI, and then add it into the graph itself, and then it's going to bridge this gap with this new idea, and then identify a new gap that we should focus on to bridge and to make the structure more coherent. As you will see, this percentage of modularity is going to go down more and more the more statements you add, until you will reach diversified structure. The graph will be optimally connected. You will have a lot more concepts, a lot more connections in the graph. You will have less of those dispersed clusters that you have here, and then gradually, once you reach the end, so to say, then you can start using this graph as a reasoning map for your AI, which you would then do from here. You would click here and then use the instruction to install your MCP server in Claude, and then simply refer to this graph by the name, and then the MCP server will automatically know how to extract the graph from your toolset. You see here I asked it to use this graph, and it basically understood the request, and then it used a specific tool, analyzed the content of an existing InfraNodus graph by name, right? It made a request to this graph, and then it received the response on the main structure, on the main ideas inside, this whole reasoning map that you can also see visualized here, which is, by the way, great, because you can also edit the brain that your AI is using for thinking, right? And then you use this brain to then generate a response. So it's really great because you first curate what kind of knowledge you want to focus on, what are the relations between the ideas here, right? You build up your own map, and then you use this reasoning map in your LLM. I find this approach really interesting. Now, if you would like, you can also build the same map step by step. So this you do if you go to InfraNodus, and then let's say we're interested in ecological thinking, but this time we want to build this map step by step. So then we would go to other sources, AI generated here, and then step by step ideation. And let's give this graph another name. And the way it works here is that it doesn't just auto-generate everything for you. It will think with you step by step. And here you have a special mode turned on where it will automatically add to graph all the statements that it generates. You see, add to graph AI messages. You can also switch it off and manually add everything that you like. But at the beginning, I just like it to add a few ideas first, right? So for instance, it says here, in that sense, ecological thinking links mind and environment. To think ecologically is to think in webs, not lines. I actually like this idea. Let me add this additionally here, okay? And then if I would like to expand on this discourse, I can simply click this button, and then it will ask it to elaborate on the statement, and it will automatically add the next statement. If I want to have full control of the data that's added, I would simply switch this off, manual control, switch off. I can also go to show content and delete some of the statements it added. All right, so for example, I can say, okay, delete actually everything except for maybe my first message, and that little message that I added in the end that I really liked, which was about thinking ecologically, is thinking in webs, not lines, and links mind environment. And then I delete everything else. So you see, I have full control. I only have 3 statements left now. And now I'm going to say that I manually add what I like, so don't add anything for me. Now I just have these clusters, web thinking and ecological mind, right? And then I can say, okay, so if I see something in that answer I like, I can simply select it, add it to the graph, and then it will be added here automatically. Or I can also add my own ideas that I will get inspired from the AI output here by adding the text in this input field. So you really have granular control of how you can build the graph in this case. And the more you go, the more you can use the graph and focus on the topics you find interesting. So you don't even need to read the whole thing. You can just say like, okay, I'm thinking about ecological thinking. What am I interested in that relates to this topic, but also to some interesting clusters on the graph? For example, I actually like this cognitive loop idea. Let's develop it further. So I can select it here, right? And then you see the selection is also in the AI chat. So that means that next time it will give an answer, it will generate an idea that will relate to this cluster. And then, okay, let's just come up with ideas. So you see you have auto-generate, and then I'm going to say generate an idea for me that will connect to this cluster of cognitive loops, but also to ecological thinking, right? And here it comes up with an idea of cognitive ecology dashboard that maps how a single thought process affects across a system. So you can basically build some tool that would help you think ecologically. If I wanted to be a little bit less practical, I can also change the mode to transcend mode, and then it will just try to develop this topic, but to link it to other interesting topics. So for example, here it says the mind doesn't merely notice loops in the world, it is also one of the world's feedback organs. Thought is ecological not when it maps connection, but when it alters its own conditions of perception in response to what it returns. So it's great. It's linking this concept of ecology to feedback loops. I actually like the whole statement, so I'm just going to click this button here, add the message to graph, and you see my graph is expanding and I have more clusters added. And once I have several clusters, so for example here it highlights that maybe I should focus my attention on small changes, feedback systems, and ecological thinking. We select them all, then we can use the same approach as I showed you last time, where we select the topics here, and then we say, okay, so now generate a question that would link these topics together, right? And then once it generates a question, you can ask it to elaborate on that statement or come up with your own answer, and then add this answer, and then continue building the graph in this manual way. So, for example, here I like this idea. Ecological thinking is not just about recognizing complexity. It's also about cultivating a mind that can be changed by the consequences it helps create. So it's great. It's thinking about consequences, the future, the past. The environment is the time that you operate in. Very interesting and philosophical idea, by the way. I'm going to add it into the graph also. So you see, I'm kind of picking the fruits of knowledge from the tree and creating my own tree, which I then use to expand my ideas. And by the way, I think you already saw this other video that I made on how InfraNodus works, that it always tries to optimize your thinking process. so that if it's too diversified or dispersed, it's going to try to make it more coherent. If you're too biased, if you're too focused on one idea, obsessed with a certain loop, it will try to bring diverse range of ideas. So it's always optimizing for a mix of coherency, but also diversity. And this is exactly what it's doing. Now the structure is diverse, so that's kind of optimal for any research process. So it's just going to try to help you focus on the main topics, but connect them to smaller topics. So there's always some balance in this thinking process, in this thinking system, right? So for example, here you see small changes, participatory systems, web thinking. Okay, great. I select those, highlight, then I ask it to produce me an interesting question that would link these ideas together. Then I go to AI Insights. You see I have this topic selected, and then now I can send this question back to AI and generate an interesting idea or think of an answer myself. So it's really this iterative way of thinking where you gradually add more and more ideas, where you extend the breadth of your thinking and of your knowledge step by step, and at the same time also trying to keep it all coherent. And then once you build something you like, in the same way as you did before, you can use this feature here where you connect this graph to your favorite MCP server, and then you use this graph as a reasoning expert, as a reasoning ontology in your thinking process, in your other workflows that you have with AI, or even inside here itself. Like once you build the graph, you can also just start a new chat and start asking questions about it. For example, how you can develop this discourse, or how can ecological thinking be used in my daily life. You can actually ask all this using this chat as well. So it's really versatile in the sense that you can build an ontology and then use it in your favorite LLM tool, or you can also build an ontology and then interact with it yourself. You can even, by the way, make this graph public here, share it with others, and then other people can use your ontology, your knowledge graph, in order to interact with it using the chat itself or connect it to their favorite MCP server if you make it public here. By default, it's all private, of course. So you see it really has a bunch of different uses. And the main idea here is that you build an expert knowledge graph, an expert ontology, which can then be reused by other people in their tools or inside InfraNodus itself. And it has not only this textual component where you have information as text, but it also has this visual component that can then be used for you to control how the structure of this knowledge is, what it's about, give you an overview. So you have this much higher level of observability than if you just uploaded a bunch of documents and you don't even see how AI sees them. And here you actually see how AI sees them, so you can adjust it and handcraft it to be exactly what you want it to be. So I hope you find this workflow interesting. Let me know what you think about it. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below this video. And also, if you watched until the end, please subscribe, because then it will send the signal to the algorithm to show this video to other people who are interested in similar content. Thank you very much.